conversation, I think that's always a place to begin, because we are recognizing, we're naming the fact that there is a problem. And even though we would want to think that we've got it right, we haven't got it right. We do have a lot of things that we need to address and we need to start talking about. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I love the idea of clear minds, better lives, because it's another place that we are encouraging people to talk and have these conversations. So I was thinking about mental health amongst our community. The one thing, so just a little bit of background. I was a high school teacher in Kenya many, many years ago, before many of the people on this call were born. And so it was a girls' school in Nairobi. I had never heard of depression. But the girls would say, oh, somebody would say, I have depression, I'm depressed. And it sounded like just a thing. I was thinking, what are you talking about, right? Because I had come from the village where life was very hard. I was raised in a village. Life was very difficult, a lot of really physical labor, and a lot of need basically for food, shelter, whatever you can think of. And so I was teaching at a girls' school, Loreto Convent Valley Road. It was a private girls' school, mostly people from middle to upper class. They were fairly well-to-do. So when these girls would come and say, oh, so-and-so has depression, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? It seemed like a thing that people put on. You don't really know what problems are, right? How can you be depressed? And I would dismiss that and think, oh, it's just a fad. It's something that's passing. The girls think it's cool to say that they have depression. But I continued to think that way for a very long time, because I'm thinking they don't really know what problems, what it is really like to have problems, right? I say this because that is a mentality amongst many of our own people. We dismiss mental health issues because we have probably come from very different backgrounds. We've been exposed to circumstances that probably, when you think about it and compare to life in America, for example, if you grew up in Kenya and came here, life is very different here than it was there. So there's a tendency to minimize any concerns here and say, oh, you've got it really easy. What do you have to be depressed about? What do you mean depression? What do you mean anxiety? What do you mean this or the other, right? What do you know about waking up really early and going to the shamba? You don't know any of those. You don't know anything about a hard life. And so we have parents and a community that I think we harp on this so often in our households. When I've talked to the youth here, I hear a lot of that kind of thing where parents and the community in general minimize the concerns that our children and our youth are bringing, and thinking, you ought to be grateful. You don't know what it's like to struggle. And instead of listening and understanding that from their own perspective, this is real, and that their journey and their struggle is real to them. So I came here, I trained to be a counselor. I came to Ohio, and I was in a small town in Ohio. I went to Heidelberg University in Ohio. And I remember so this was after teaching in Kenya for many years, and I came here to get my master's degree in counseling. I was doing my internship at an agency in the community. I would see people from, the area that would come for counseling, and I'd be sitting in a room with a client, and I'm looking at them and thinking, so they're telling me about their life and their problems, and I am sitting there thinking, why are you really here? What is your problem? Because they're telling me the problem, but in my mind, I'm stuck on something else. Like, what? Like, I hope I'm clear in what I'm saying. So for me, I'm waiting for them to come up with these big things. So I'm sitting there in the room with a client, and I keep waiting for them, and I'm thinking, this can't be really why you came to me, right? There must be something else you haven't told me. And I realized, no, this is what it is. Because again, I was struggling. I was a graduate student, didn't have much money. My mother was very sick. So I'm thinking, life is really hard. Do you realize how hard life is? And you're sitting here wasting my time. Go get a life, do something meaningful with your life. But I realized that it took me a long time to learn this. And I think this is a lesson that our community could do well to learn. That it was a problem that brought them to counseling because they perceived it as a problem. And in their own perception and their reality was that this was a problem. It didn't matter what I thought. It did not matter what I thought. What mattered was that from their perspective, this was something that they were really struggling with. I had to learn to step outside of myself and really listen to my clients when they came in, and listen to their story and hear what it is that was bothering them from their own perspective rather than applying my own lens. As a Kenyan community, as an immigrant community, I know we have people here that are from different places. We wear this thing where we have a lot of, our youth who are struggling with one thing or another, but we are telling them, oh, this is not really a problem. You need to get serious, wake up, work hard, do this, and we're not really listening. And so what happens is that they try to talk to us, they try to get our attention, they don't get it, and they try again, they don't get it because we dismiss it. We tell them, oh, you should be thankful that, you can just get up and go up the street and get on the bus and go to school. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. And so you have nothing to be anxious about, you have nothing to be depressed about, not recognizing that their perspective is what really matters. And so I think one of the things we have to learn to do is to listen rather than to assume that, and arrive at conclusions about mental health, about a person's state of well-being or emotional and mental status, just based on my own application of the concept that if they're struggling, that I need to pay attention to them and not blow that off. So I was thinking about some of the cultural, our own cultural, the cultural influences that sort of color the way that we understand mental health. And so that, I think, is a big barrier to creating a place where people can talk about about these things, about mental health issues. This is particularly the case for young men. I know I have heard a lot about young men struggling, and the message to them is you should be strong. You're a man. You should, again, it's always the idea of dismissing, and I think in my mind the word is also minimizing whatever issues there might be. We minimize to them, but we also minimize in our own minds. So I might have a teenager in my house that is, going through this or that, but I am not even aware of their struggle because I'm so busy and pulled into my own life and just going about, I'm working my shift, I'm doing my job, and not really attentive to see to the changes that are occurring in the person that I'm living with. So a piece of that is also about just being really tuned to the people around us, paying attention. Depression, a lot of things, when we talk about depression, how we arrive at a diagnosis of depression, it's a change. It usually is a change in habits. So it's eating more or sleeping more, or eating less or sleeping less, or there's a change in habit, but it can only tell about that there is a change if you have been observant and are paying attention to that individual. So paying attention to our children, our spouses, and especially our young people. Another thing that I think stands in the way of really helping people here is a culture. Oh gosh, I don't even know how to say this, but it's pretty, this is something I feel really strongly about. A culture of shaming people into silence. That a person who struggles, rather than, if somebody came to me, rather than me think of how can I help this person, there's you're looking to blame that individual. What is it that you have done that caused this to happen, right? What did you do? So look back at your own actions, assess your own actions and your attitudes. What is it that you have done that caused this to happen to you? So there's a lot of shaming and blaming. I see this a lot, especially with with domestic violence and domestic abuse amongst our own community. But that's a topic that I'll come back to later if I have time to talk about it. So finger pointing and shaming, those are a major barrier to talking about mental health. So we have to learn to break the stigma and break the silence as well, and create a safe space where people can seek help. I think the one thing that's so important for us to remember is that I don't have to have the answers. I don't have to know how to help you because I am not a professional. So if I come to Jeff and I'm struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with depression, Jeff's job is not to help me. uh, through my struggle, my depression or anxiety, because Jeff is not a professional. But Jeff's place is to hold a safe space where I say, I recognize that you're struggling. Thank you for confiding in me. Let's see how we can get you help. And then you contact a professional. I think we shy away from these things because I'm thinking, I don't know what to do. If somebody comes to me and they're suicidal, if someone comes to me and they're struggling with substance use, what am I going to do? I don't know how to help them. So, and you don't have to know how to help them. There are so many resources in this country, in this county, in this city. And Jeff does a great job of getting those resources out, that it's not on you to help that individual, but you can be the conduit through whom that person gets help. Be the connection that can put them in touch with a place where they can get help. We also have, I think, a large issue with authoritarian parenting. I dare say that there's a difference between authoritative. When you think about forms of government, we talk about three. There's laissez-faire, there's authoritative, there's authoritarian. Laissez-faire is where you have a free for all. You do whatever. Everybody does their own thing, right? So if you think of a classroom, for example, a laissez-faire teacher or approach to teaching is one where the teacher just lets kids do their thing, right? And there's no sense of authority. There's no authority figure. Children are free to explore. There are schools like that in this America. I know some. I've actually seen them where that's their philosophy. And then you have authoritarian, and that's the other extreme where everything is very scripted. We don't allow room for creativity, for freedom. And when you think about authoritarian regimes, you think about North Korea, you think about China, places where the government really like you're very constrained in what you can do and very restricted in what you can think and do. And then you have authoritative. Authoritative is a good balance between where you allow people flexibility, but you also allow room for, so there's a sense of authority. There's a sense that somebody is in charge, but there's also room for people to be creative and to think in their own way. As parents, we come here, I think it's because of our system of education. So I'm speaking to parents, but also even to the young people that are here, because I'm sure you've experienced this with your parents here as well, where our system of education is very authoritarian. And so, and even our parents have raised us in that way. I know my dad was like, I was terrified of him. I loved him, but I was afraid of him. And I couldn't imagine sitting down and having a conversation with him about this or that or the other, right? Because if he found out about something I was doing, I'd get in serious trouble. There wasn't really a place to negotiate and talk about, to talk things through. And many parents here have approached parenting in the same way, where this is what you must do. This is what you must do. And we're very authoritarian in our approach to parenting and our interactions with our children. What that does is that it creates a barrier between us and them, where instead of operating from a place of freedom and the a liberty to explore and be free and open and honest about their struggles, then we create a culture of fear and an expectation of perfection, that our children must be perfect. They must do things the exact way we want them to do things. And if they don't do that, then they have failed. And the result, the punishment for that is grave. So I think people really struggle with that. Young people here, I think that's a big part of the disconnect, because that's not the kind of experience that they have in their schools, in their other relationships. But then they come home and parents are saying, this is how you must be. So I think it's just an important thing for us as parents and as a community in general to be more, I guess the fear is that people might be perceived as not having, like you're losing control in a sense, right? But you lose control. The best way to have a good relationship with your kids is not by controlling them. Your attempts at control you only have a sense of control, but you really don't have control. Honestly, it's just an illusion. And that's why when kids get to 18 or to whatever age, then we are losing our kids because we have not created a place where we really can talk to them. And what good is it to have your child physically there and to have no access to their mind, to their heart, to really know what is going on with them? So I think that's an important thing, to a balance between the laissez-faire and the authoritarian parenting, so that we encourage a space to talk, and respect their right to sort of be self-determining. I know that's it's a frightening thought for many Kenyan parents, because what am I going to do? It means I've lost control of my kids. It actually doesn't. If we work with them and learn to talk so your child will listen, and speak so your child will hear. What is it? Listen so your child will talk, and talk so your child will listen. Those are two things that we have to learn to do. So letting go our need for control, that takes courage. It takes a lot of courage. Something else that I was thinking about, that I wanted to talk about, was the idea of coping responses. When people are faced with whether it's depression or anxiety, some of the ways in which we cope as a community. I say this with a little bit of hesitation, especially because this is being recorded, Jeff. There are various coping mechanisms. Coping, I've studied coping for a long time. These are excellent coping mechanisms, but they also have the potential to be maladaptive, in a sense that, it's a great thing, having a higher power that I go to, that I know that, somehow eventually I'm going to be okay, that I can pray and it will calm me and I will have some peace. But there's also sometimes a sense of pray everything away and let's not talk about mental health, because if you're having mental health issues, we'll just pray about them, right? And then you should be well, instead of really thinking about how can we get you help. And so we can pray, absolutely, people, let's do that, because many of us are praying people. But also remember that as you pray, you're looking for divine intervention. At the same time, there must be some action taken as well, where you're seeking help, you consult with a professional, get help for yourself or for your child or for your spouse. So I'm not saying that praying is not a good thing. It's actually a great coping mechanism, to be honest with you. But it also can be a hindrance. And I have seen that be a hindrance in our community, where we have used that in place of seeking professional help. Coping should complement, not replace, seeking professional. I meant praying and spirituality. That it should complement, not supplement. Not supplement. When you supplement is you take one out in place of the other. When you complement is you add something over another. So you cannot pray instead of seeking professional help. You can pray in addition to seeking professional help, but you must seek help. You must seek help when you're overwhelmed, when you're feeling troubled, when you're experiencing, anxiety, depression, fear, panic, loneliness, isolation, whatever these things are. Pray, but definitely seek help as well. And then the last thing I will talk about is gender stereotypes that have to do with mental health. I have taken too much time. What time is it?
You're good.
Okay. I'm feeling a bit pressured because I am looking at the time. So
you're still on time.
Okay. So gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are again about men and boys. Young men, older men being strong and mentally, physically. And so there's the expectation that they should hold things together. And what happens is that when they experience fear and panic and depression or depressive symptoms, I think I said this before, that for men, a lot of times we see this, depression doesn't always come across as depression. A lot of times it comes across as anger, where they are more irritable, they're angry, they're easily, like they'll explode very easily. is because they're overwhelmed. They've reached here and they don't know how to cope. And so they're just literally on edge. And somehow for women, I think perhaps because women are, I would say that it's easier for women, but in our community, it really is not. Because then amongst women, somehow there's also an expectation that women are strong. But more so amongst men, I think for women, it's at least you might have an opportunity to talk. But with men, you don't ever talk about it, especially with young guys. And that's why I absolutely loved the Clear Minds, Better Lives, the videos, because we had young men in that. It's breaking this gender stereotype, thinking that only girls struggle with depression, only women struggle with anxiety, only girls experience these feelings. Because this is happening with our young men. And the sooner we wake up and open our eyes and really sort of own up to this, come to this realization that a lot of our young men are struggling, and they either turn to drugs and alcohol, which I'll say this, parents here, we sort of go naively thinking this isn't happening to my kids. I have talked with kids, you will be shocked. I have talked with children at church, no less, at church, who have talked about their use of drugs and other, their use of substances. And these are young girls and young boys that you would look at and never have any idea. You would never think it. But this is happening. But I think we go through this, like, we don't even want to think about it. We don't want to consider that could be a possibility. So we are here fussing about, did your child do this? Did they do this? Did you make your bed? Did you do this? And the truth is that our concerns should be much larger. It's we have real things, serious things that we should be concerned about. As you're pushing your kids to make their bed, go into that room and spend some time with them and look around. You may be shocked by what you find. So don't think that, only so and so, this kid that I saw, these pointing fingers and blaming other people and saying only, especially when it's single mothers and that we're pointing fingers and saying it's happening there, it's not happening to my family. Talk to your kids. But again, we have to learn to talk so that they will listen. And we also have to listen to them in a way that allows them to talk. Was somebody saying something? Okay.
I think it's
right. So substance use, where did I was talking about gender stereotypes about mental health, that we need to not make assumptions that it's girls or women, that we need to also be paying attention to what's going on with our men, old, young, sometimes kids as young as 9, 10. Don't assume that this isn't happening to your child. Ask questions, observe, pay attention, spend time with them. And if you see changes, don't be afraid to have a conversation with them. But again, it has to be a conversation from that perspective that I talked about. You're not having a conversation with them and saying you're in so much trouble. As long as you take that stance, they're going to shut down. They're not going to talk to you. If your approach is, oh my gosh, you're going to be in so much trouble when I find out the truth, you'll never find out, because they're very savvy, they're very smart, and they will cover their tracks. And you'll just live there thinking that things are great, when in truth, there's a lot that you should be paying attention to. Jeff, let me take 2 more minutes to talk about something else here. There's a thing called suicide contagion. I don't know if you have heard of it. This is something that worries me day and night, to be honest with you. I worry about this a lot. When we have had so much loss in our community, I mean, I just think about, since January, how many people have we buried just here in St. Louis? How many people have we buried in our community? We have lost so many people. So people, there's vicarious trauma, even if it's not your own family member. As a community, we're hurting, we're suffering from all of this loss by extension. So vicariously, we're experiencing the loss and grief of others that those within our community are experiencing. So that's one piece. But the other part of it is, when we lose our children to suicide, remember, there was a whole mess about the movie called 13 Reasons Why. I think that's the name of that movie, 13 Reasons Why. And there were people who were very upset about it. If you haven't seen it, I shouldn't say watch it, but if you do, make sure that you're watching it with your family. But 13 Reasons Why. There was a lot of pushback about that movie. When Robin Williams died, the comedian, we had a spate of suicides right around that same time. Suicide contagion is a phenomenon. It's actually something that's the subject of research studies, where when you have a suicide within a community or within a family, it's almost as though having one suicide removes this whole mystification around suicide, and that which was, I mean, it's still taboo in a sense, but then other people, God, I have to be really careful how I talk about this, because it's important that we are talking, and people are afraid that by asking a person, are you thinking of committing suicide? Have you considered suicide? Are you thinking of hurting yourself? That we worry that by asking them that we are planting the idea in their head. And we know that from research that is not true, that it's important to ask a person really directly, have you thought of hurting yourself, right? But the other piece, so that's one piece, but then so I'm struggling with how to balance these two pieces, because both are true, even though they can seem to be somewhat contradictory. The other piece is that when one person in a family commits suicide, then it's almost as though the bar is lowered in that community, and that which was considered taboo and unthinkable now becomes an option for another person. So it's not unusual when you have a celebrity die by suicide. It's not unusual then to have other almost copycat suicides after that. When you have death in a community by suicide, then it's not unusual to have other instances of death by suicide within that same community or within a family. So a lot of times when you go to a therapist and you're struggling with, suicidal thoughts, or you're struggling with depression, and a therapist will ask you, is there a history of suicide in your family? Because if there's a family history, there's a way in which that can be considered to have sort of lowered the barrier and made this seem like more like a viable option for an individual. So the fact that we have a lot of suicides in our community means that we have to be even more vigilant. We have to be even more vigilant, because if we are not, we're going to lose our people. We're going to lose our people, because kids struggle. You hear somebody did this, and it's not that it's glamorous. It's not glamorizing suicide, but it's just a sense that so and so now he doesn't have to worry. He doesn't have to think about all of this that's happening. And then it seems like an easy way out for a lot of other people. So I think it's important that as this happens in our community, that we're really, really open to talking, that we're really listening to people, that you're checking in with people, and that we're aware that that is a real thing. So suicide contagion, it's a real thing, and that we are guarding against it in our community. We have to bolster ourselves, our resources in our community, so that people who are at great risk know that there is help. If you're a parent, if you're a spouse, or if you're a mother, or if you're a child of somebody that's struggling, that you can really be there to hold, to support that individual and encourage them to seek help. Sometimes you may have to seek help for that individual. Sometimes they don't recognize how badly in need of help they are. And you may have to reach out and almost have an intervention, call somebody else that they might listen to if they're not taking you seriously. Sometimes it's also the adult children. So if you have older kids, an older child, say a kid that's 18, 19, you might have a parent that's really struggling. So it doesn't have to just be kids struggling. Also, be aware of what's going on with your parents. Parents are struggling as well. So if I'm the adult or the grown-up child of a parent that is really going through a hard time, I need to be sensitive to their experience. And if I need, sometimes you may need to call somebody else and say, Mom is really struggling and she needs help. Please help me find a way to help my mother. Please help me find a way to help my father. And then do whatever you can. Reach out to Jeff, because I think of Jeff as a connector, because he always has, he'll tell you, this is who you need to go to. This is where you need to go, behavioral health services, or call this number, call the suicide hotline, call some other office, but reach out, find help. I think I'm gonna leave it there. I had several other things, but I feel like that's enough for one day, and then I'll leave it out for questions, and so I can also look at the chat to see what questions there are. We must talk. We must talk. Silence is the enemy of progress, people. Silence is the enemy of progress. Silence is the enemy of mental health and well-being. A culture of silence, it breeds stigma, it breeds shame, it breeds isolation and fear, and creates barriers for people who really need to seek help. So we have to talk, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and we've had other conversations, and the hope is that we can continue to have those conversations. So people who are experiencing this don't feel like they're crazy. They know that this is not unusual, that it's fine that they're struggling, and that there is help for them. There is absolutely help for them.
Wow, that is very powerful, Dr. Muthoni. I can listen to you over and over and over. I can never get tired of it. You really have a great, touch very important topics. And I hope everybody was listening, because you touch a lot with the parenting, you touch a lot even with the youth, you touch even with adults, the challenges that we're going through. Actually, you capture very important areas. And I think, I mean, we really need more of this. I think, like you said, it's hard to be able to capture everything in this kind of a discussion. I'm listening here. I'm like, you need to listen. I mean, listen to your child so that you listen to your child so that they can talk, and talk to your child so that they can listen. I mean, praying is supposed to be able to complement, not to supplement when you have the mental issues. I mean, all this the best way to have a sense of control is when you can get your kid to listen to you, to have your attention. I mean, we can go over and over, but I hope that people are able to capture some of those important areas. But I think I have, this is Ciru wanted to add something to support what you just talked about. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ciru.
Yeah, Dr. Muthoni, thank you so much. I feel like I would also listen to you forever, because everything you said, I completely agree with. I feel like I want to just expound on a couple of things that she mentioned for the parents to understand. And I understand that some of you are older than me, some of you can be my parents. I can see my Auntie Judy is here, Aunt Sylvia's here. And I'm gonna talk from like the parental point of view. No, not the parental, the child's point of view, because I'm still my parents' children. I'm still young. I'm not as old. So she talked about, when I saw the comment, someone says parents telling their kids behave like a Kenyan, they do not know what is being Kenyan. And then there's something that said, and I'm sorry, it's taken me away, but I wanted to really expound on identity crisis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Your kids are having a huge identity crisis right now. If you're the type of parent, and forgive me, I am not bashing your parenting skills. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to add on to the fact of what Dr. Muthoni has said. So, for example, if you have a child who's around the age, I'm going to pick a random age, 6 to 10, right? And they go to school in the States, and let's not forget they're Black. At the end of the day, we may be Africans, but when we come here, we still fall under the Black American category. Yeah, we may be African, and sometimes they look us up to a different light. But having, as a female who has guys who are guy friends, and my guy friends face a lot of racism from cops, and it's from personal experience that I have guy friends who have faced a lot of racism from cops. It's like, there's so much identity crisis, to the sense of like, imagine your 60-year-old, he or she has gone to elementary that morning. At elementary school, her entire day consists of an American culture. I went to elementary school here, and I think kindergarten, so I know how it was, but it was in the 90s, so I can't really remember my experience. But like, that's the home. And then you come home, like your child comes home, and when they come home, you're telling them, okay, when you enter this house, your Americanness stops there, and when you enter my house, it's a full Kenyan authoritarian household. I'm just quoting, I'm just using the doctor's words. These are not my words. She said authoritarian. Am I saying it right, Dr. Muthoni?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So they enter the house and they come to an authoritarian. So a child themselves have emotions. Children have emotions, and the worst thing that you can ever do is dismiss your child's emotion. So when your kid enters a house, they're Kenyan. So imagine that being your kid's experience until they're 18 years old, because when they leave for college, it's another whole experience. But for 12 years, if your child is experiencing that sort of like struggle, they'll never be able to find out who they are. They will never have the chance to know who they are. And, you know, I can agree to that comment, because it's hard to know what being Kenyan is when you're not even in Kenya. And it's not fair to your child to expect your child to be like, you know, my parents are expecting me to do this because that's how you're raised. And when you go to Rome, do as the Romans do, but we're not going to do everything that the Romans do. I'm a Christian myself. You know, I still believe in God and things like, so that's not something I brush off. I do believe in praying, but I feel like we need to understand what kind of home and environment we're going to shape for our children. That way, when they leave our houses, like Dr. Muthoni is saying, like, they're able to feel like when they come home, they're coming to a safe environment. And I think when we're talking about creating safe spaces for our children and creating a relationship, I'll agree with you, Dr. Muthoni. I was actually just talking to my dad the other day about this. I was like, I used to fear you growing up, but my father and I now like can talk about anything. We can talk about almost anything. Let me not say anything, almost anything. But I was never able to talk to my father about almost anything. That was unheard of, because I grew up fearing my father. And I know that kind of like, you love them, but there's some sort of fear, like if I even, you know how in Kenya primary school, if you even do something tiny, it was probably nothing big, and they call your dad, that's it. And so I think also, like, as much as it is our expectations to be good kids, I think parents also, like, and it's a choice to any parent on this platform, it's your mantle, especially for young children, because Dr. Muthoni, I don't know if you spoke on this, but 0 to 6 are the most formidable years of a child psychologically. And like, you know, for example, 0 to 6, I was never hugged by my parents. I'm not bashing my parents. It's fine. I'm not mad that I wasn't hugged. It's fine. It was a culture. I was never hugged. So right now, when my dad attempts to hug me or my mother, I find that so weird. I find it so weird, because I'm like, you never showed me love like this. So it becomes really hard for me. So I would say, like, if you have young children, create that safe space of like, okay, yeah, you will discipline me, but also like love me. It's okay to show your child love. I think that is the best thing you can ever show your child. And I think another thing to say is, like, when you discipline your child, and I know we say this is an American way, but when you discipline your child, especially when they're like becoming teenagers and gonna go to college, it's okay to tell them why you're disciplining them. A 2-year-old is not gonna really understand the wrong of a situation. But if I'm a teenager and I went TPing someone's houses, and I come home and my parents are like, we need to ground you, I strongly find an issue with the parenting that we have in the Kenyan community of like, okay, I'll just beat you because you did something wrong. Okay, fine. Okay, that's your stuff. But then take it a step further and tell your child, I am beating you because this is wrong and this is why it's wrong. Because even if we are seen to have like, we're developing as children at the time, we grow to understand. And that's why, like, when you leave for college, you create that relationship with your child. You always have that relationship with your child. Tell your children you love them. Like, just taking that time to be like, I love you, Waidira or whoever, like, I love you. It is so important. I can't even emphasize on how important that is. So one thing we all need to understand, our children right now are going through identity crisis. I'm in my 20s, so I'm not experiencing that because I'm not in school anymore. I'm an adult. I'm out of that. But to parents who have young children, you also need to study America. Like, I really urge all the parents here, understand what it is to be Black in America. Do not, especially if you have sons, understand what it is to live in America, understand what it is to be Black in America. And CMBL, Clear Minds, Better Lives, we're gonna have a podcast coming out next week about the Black male experience in the Kenyan, from the Kenyan guys. So we're going to have a couple of people talking about that. But I completely agree with you, Dr. Muthoni, of how we need to concentrate on male mental health. That is the most important thing. Men in our society have been denied their right to feel. They have been denied their right to be humans. You have been denied your right to be a human being. And the men in my life, we give them that space. I think I have created that space for any friend who's a guy in my life to be like, I can call her and tell her anything because I'm feeling these emotions. I understand that we grew up in the society of like, be tough, be strong, you're the provider of the family, but it's highly important to understand that men are just human beings like we are. Yes, women are emotional, we are, but I think we need to do better and create the spaces for men to talk. That way we can be able to all come together to an understanding. And I think Clear Minds, Better Lives is working on doing that as well. Like I said earlier, I don't know if everyone was on here earlier, but I lost a friend to suicide, and he drunk himself to death and then hung himself. And at least 6 bottles of alcohol were found next to his body hanging. And I'm giving you the graphic of that idea to understand. I'm trying to understand, like, how lonely could have my friend been to take these measures. So realize also, like, men go through things. Like Dr. Muthoni is saying, half the Kenyan community, our parents just think like this substance abuse taking or this smoking, it's like what we do, or I'm saying we in form of like young people, but it's a form of like numbing yourself. It's a form of saying that if I keep drinking, if I keep smoking, this pain will go away, especially guys. And that's not true, because the thing is, nikikunywa leo, shida zangu zitakuwa tu hapo kesho, waiting for me. They will never change. Like, so it's also like taking that mantle of working on yourself. And like I said earlier, self is the most important thing towards working on mental health. And suicide, when you said it's suicide contagion, it's completely real. And there are 2 types of suicide that I learned this, and I don't know if Jeff had shared that video, because I talked about suicide with Damaris Karanja last week, and she told me that there's passive suicide ideation and active. So passive is when you've had feelings of just dying, but you don't have a plan. And I've gone through that. I've gone through passive suicide ideations multiple times. I've never had a plan to take my life, not at all. But I've been so low, I'm just like, I do not want to exist anymore. And there have been moments where I have been with friends who are actively suicide. So, and I think that's where Dr. Muthoni is saying, reach out for help, call the National Suicide Hotline, do this and that. And I also believe in therapy, because it really, and therapy takes time. Dr. Muthoni, correct me if I'm wrong, it takes time to find the right therapist, because we're different people, we're different human beings. I can refer you to a certain therapist and it doesn't work for you, because it's a relationship you're building with someone to be able to talk about your emotions. But I just kind of wanted to highlight that, because I think it's so important. And before I forget, you talked about shame, which is so important. I think our community has for a long time shamed negative things. And I think if we learn to change that mindset of not shaming things and not judging things in the moment, we're going to be able to take time and completely understand what it is other people are going through. And just like she's saying, like, other people bash parents, other people bash how a certain kid is, I also think there needs to be a sort of boundary set. Boundaries are so important, and I'm sure Dr. Muthoni at some point you'll talk about that. Boundaries are so important. Creating healthy boundaries around your families, and your kids, in order to kind of just go forward. So that's all I wanted to add.
No, that is great. I really appreciate your input, and I think I like this discussion because we are just picking up the way it is. You're not sugarcoating anything. That's how we're able to address some of these issues, because in the past, people don't want to talk about it, but things are still happening. Issues there, the challenges everywhere. But and then the other thing when we were preparing this topic is that this is the best time to have such a conversation when when nothing is bad it has happened, because normally I see when something happens, we all have that time to come and talk, and we need to talk. We need to have a conversation. You can have a gathering up to 100 people when something is wrong, it has happened. But when it comes to talking about issues that will prevent something from happening, we don't have a lot of attention, people paying attention to that. But I'm so happy to see that in such a forum, within a very short notice, we had almost over 40 people log in, and I see you guys are still there. We are over the time that we were, and I feel like, I mean, it's a great fun. But if we can have a conversation like this and more of these that will save one single life, I think that is worth the time. And I also say that it's not just only just saving a life, but also having somebody who will be able to save them from getting that depression, somebody who will save them from getting that any kind of illness. Thousands and thousands of people will be able to, because of listening and be able to having such conversation, will be able to not only just prevent somebody from committing suicide, but you give them a guidance where they're able to be somebody of a substance. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so proud what we've done is actually when we introduced the mentorship program, it was actually to address the issue that we have in the community, where we have young people who are able to meet with people like Dr. Muthoni, who is already in the field, and other people. I see Dr. Moya is here. I see Martin, Dr. from Cameroon is here. I see a lot of great people we talked with Dr. Martin. Thank you, Martin, for logging in. He said that I have been in the field. I don't want to be able to be there to help where I can. People can reach out to me and I can be able to share. Dr. Muya has always been there, and Dr. Mungai. We've done a lot of things because we don't have to wait until things has happened, then we talk about it, but we can have a conversation that will be able to prevent things from happening, or prevent these young people getting into that such thoughts. I like what Ciru just shared. I think there is an issue that we also need to work on when it comes to parenting. But at the same time, there is also another issue that I've always had with our young people. I tell them, yes, we want our parents to change, but we also have to find a way how we can understand. I've done an emotional intelligence test, and I've always said that suppose we push, and I was telling you, I want really to make sure that your parents will change. And I wish I can be able to make that things we just put in their head and see, they can make them see things in a different way. But if for some reason is not able to change, how can we work with somebody who can be able to change? For the time being, you are with that kid, with that parent. And it sounds like it's a challenge that we have to bring a conversation between both sides. Where now we can be able to hear what Ciru is sharing and other young people coming in sharing what is it, but also the parents also coming out. I'm so proud that you guys were able to come in today, because there is something you're going to learn today that you're going to go take home. When it comes to the way you've been doing parenting, the way you've been relating with young people, there is something that will be able to help you have a way to see things in a different way, as opposed to now what you think that I would do with my parenting. This is what I know, it's the way it is. Then you realize I've done it all wrong, but it may be too late. But having a conversation where you're able to correct yourself early, the better. The other thing I always say, and I find that Dr. Muthoni has said in the Ciru, as a community, we do a very big mistake. When somebody has something going on, a young people has something going on, instead of helping, we gossip a lot. We go gossiping and talking about, you see, so-and-so is doing this. And that is why people would not be free to be able to share their challenges. If you have something can do it, then if there's nothing you can do to help, I would say, and I'm going to use the word, just shut up. If you're not going to help somebody, don't go and gossiping, telling people this, so-and-so is going through, so-and-so just came to me and he told me that he starts struggling with substance use, and it's just called mushene everywhere. It spoils, you kill family by that. I've always said, if there's nothing that I'm gonna do about it, I've always said, I don't want to talk about it. But if I'm having so that I can be able to reach out and I say, this is what you're going through, this is where you can be able to get them help. Let's find a way that somebody can be able, I've always said, be that person, find a way you can be able to build a confidence and trust with the one young person who can build a trust with you, and you'll be able to give a help. Just one person.
Jeff,
Yes.
okay, can I just on an example of shame? I'm just gonna give an example. That way people can really understand what shame can do to someone. I'm also part of the Young African Leaders Initiative, which is at YALI, and we had an African for Her, which is concentrated on period poverty, trying to supply sanitary needs to young girls in Africa. And there was a certain girl in our country, in Busia County. She didn't have pads, and she went to school, and the teacher spotted spotting on her dress. So her teacher, who's a female, called her in front of the whole class and told her, you're bleeding, why are you bleeding, why don't you have a pad on? And that was in front of other kids. 2 days later, the 13-year-old took her life.
Ooh.
And that just gives me chills as I'm talking about it. So whenever you decide to discuss someone else's struggle, think before you act. I think that's the best thing I can say, because there's not a solution to that. I just think we never think about what the other person might be going through. You don't know their struggle. And I also have never been a fan of how it's a community. Yes, I completely understand we're communal people, but sometimes the way my parents may parent me is what works for me as Ciru as an individual. And sometimes what may work for Jeff's child is for Jeff's child alone. So Jeff can never parent, we can never parent kids the same in our community. We cannot do that because they're individual people, they're individual selves. So I just kind of wanted to say that before.
No, that's good. That's good. I think we can go over and over and over. So I'm reading the comments here, and I feel like we really need to come to close to an end. But I reading some comments here that said this is a great forum, and calling things as they are is the only way to learn and change. And Ciru, great input. Somebody gives a website there. You can click and you can be able to read more about it. There is another comment from Leah. We appreciate you, Ciru, for sharing from a child who is grown up here. Let's have more of this forum. Sylvia, appreciate you appreciate all you young adults for getting this conversation going, learning something new each day. Thank you. And I see Dr. Mungai, please plan 2 more sessions on this topic. I had a feeling that Dr. Muthoni and Ciru have more to share. Great presentations, and thank you for being so candid and informative. Let's get another session or 2. Great presentation. I mean, there's so many things that I'm reading. Thank you for all we need. I think.
Jeff.
Yes, go ahead.
Jeff, let me just say first, thank you for inviting me. And as someone who has raised 5 children here in the United States, I totally agree with what Ciru said about parenting. And so I would encourage those of us who are a little bit older not to get defensive about what she was saying, because what she said is true. I would suggest that you consider a forum like this on the immigrant experience, so that, and not necessarily about mental health, but just the immigrant experience. Because some of the things that she mentioned are not unique to Kenyans or even unique to Africans. You have probably heard about the Asian tiger mom. And so those are some things that I think we need to just talk about, not necessarily to cast blame, but just to raise awareness. So I thought I'd mention that. So thank you for inviting me. And Ciru, thank you for sharing from your heart And I thank Dr. Muthoni for an excellent presentation too. So thank you, Jeff. Great job, my brother.
Thank you, my brother. I really appreciate Dr. Martin Martin is from Cameroon, the only man from Cameroon around. But we appreciate, he's been a great supporter of E4A and also a great mentor. So he's willing also to help us with the mentoring program. So we appreciate Martin for joining. If you have a question, I will ask.
And then after that, I'll say this: let's expose our parents. I'm a parent. Some of them innocently, I don't know whether it's from ignorance or I don't know, but some of them are not exposed. We need to expose our parents so that they can know, because you'll be surprised. I talk a lot with so many people. You'll be very surprised that some of our parents are not aware, either because of ignorance or they are so busy that they miss out that there is something going on in either their families or even in the community. So let's expose. And because, as Dr. Muthoni said, Jeff is a connector. Let's get more resources. Let's get more forums. Let's talk about this, and let's not wait until things happen. Let us be intentional and then create more forums, even for the parents, to expose them to what is going on in the community. And I believe that will be one step towards having a solution in solving this challenge that we're having. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you so much. I think